Everything your biology textbook told you about where humans come from is based on a gap, not a lie, not bad science, a gap. A 100-year-old assumption that nobody questioned because nobody had a reason to. Until the 26th of March, 2026, when a single jawbone pulled from Egyptian sand didn't just question that assumption, it dismantled it. Scientists are now pointing the origin arrow somewhere no one expected. And by the end of this video, you're going to ask a question about your own family tree that you've never been given permission to ask before. 17 million years ago, northern Egypt, not the desert you're picturing. There is no desert. There is a coastal river delta lush, warm, and dense, with trees hanging heavy with fruit over tidal channels that no longer exist. There is the sound of water, the smell of wet vegetation, a warm, humid climate, unlike anything that part of the world knows today. And somewhere in that vanished landscape, a creature is moving through the undergrowth. It weighs about as much as a German shepherd. It eats fruit when the season is generous. When the climate shifts and strips the trees bare, it cracks open hard seeds to survive. It doesn't know it's sitting at the most important fork in evolutionary history. It doesn't know that its jaw, one single piece of bone, will be pulled from the ground 17 million years later and stop an entire scientific field cold. This creature sat right at the edge of the line that, once crossed, would eventually lead to every one of us. And the world wasn't looking for it. Not here, not in Egypt, not in this corner of Africa. For 100 years, the scientific establishment was looking somewhere else entirely. Here's the question this video is going to answer. Not just where this fossil was found, but why it took 100 years to look there. What that says about how science works. And what it means for the origin story you've been carrying since the 6th grade. Before we go any further, I want to plant something in the back of your mind. Ancient Egypt built one of the greatest civilizations in human history. But it did something that no other civilization on Earth ever did. For over 3,000 years, the Egyptians made apes sacred. The god Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, knowledge, and eternal judgment, was depicted as a hamadryas baboon, seated in solemn authority. Thousands of baboons were mummified as divine offerings. 35-ton quartzite statues of seated primates were erected. A baboon, inscribed with the name of Narmer, the very first pharaoh, dates to 3100 BCE. No other civilization did this. Not Greece, not Rome, not China, not Mesoamerica, only Egypt, only here. Keep that in mind. Because the land that held its apes as gods, it turns out, may also hold in its sand the bones of the ancestor of every living ape on Earth. We'll come back to this, but first, let's start where the story actually begins. Here's what every biology class in America has taught for generations. Human origins Africa, specifically East Africa, the Rift Valley, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania. That was the answer. That was textbook certainty. That was settled science. The birthplace of the ape family, the lineage that eventually produced chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, gibbons, and humans. Every human being drawing breath on this planet right now. And it was backed by real evidence. 25 million years ago, in the Oligocene epoch, the earliest apes emerged in a region scientists call Afro-Arabia, a connected landmass before the tectonic plates finished their rearrangement. These early apes diversified. They spread. And by roughly 14 to 16 million years ago during the early Miocene, they began pushing north into Eurasia, into Europe, into Asia. That was the established story. That was consensus. But here's the problem nobody talked about. Almost every key fossil that built this story came from one corner of the African continent. East Africa had the right geology for fossilization. It had active, well-funded paleontology communities. It had decades of organized excavation. And so, naturally, understandably, that's where the story was written. Think of it this way. You drop your keys at night. There is one streetlight. You look for your keys under that streetlight. Not because the keys are there, because that's where you can see. For a century, the paleontological streetlight was aimed at East Africa. North Africa? Egypt? The Sahara? Scientists had pulled monkey fossils from these regions for 100 years. Plenty of them. But apes? Zero. Nothing. And so, scientists did what scientists do when the data is thin. They drew a conclusion. They assumed apes simply weren't there. Maybe the habitat was wrong. Maybe the geography blocked them. Maybe North Africa was just outside the zone. That assumption got written into papers. Those papers got cited in textbooks. Those textbooks shaped careers. And after enough repetitions, the assumption hardened into fact. Nobody did anything wrong here. This is not a cover-up. This is not institutional malice. This is just how science moves when it's following the light. What was missing was someone willing to look in the dark. His name is Dr. Hesham Salem. Born in 1,975 inches Egypt's Sharqiya region, geology degree from Mansoura University. Then, and this detail matters, he became the first Egyptian in decades to earn a doctorate in vertebrate paleontology from the University of Oxford. He could have stayed in England. He chose not to. He came back home. He built the Mansoura University Vertebrate Paleontology Center, the MUVP, from nearly nothing, the first dedicated vertebrate paleontology program in the entire Middle East. In 2018, his team made international headlines. They pulled a dinosaur out of the Egyptian desert, Mansourasaurus shahinai, a school bus-sized titanosaur, published in Nature, covered by every major science outlet on Earth. When his American colleague first saw the photographs, he called it the Holy Grail of African dinosaur fossils. But Salam wasn't done, because while the world was celebrating dinosaurs, he was already quietly, stubbornly focused on something else. Every time he looked closely at the early ape family tree, he saw a gap, a geographic hole between the earliest African apes and the earliest Eurasian apes. And he believed, against the consensus of his entire field, that North Africa was where that hole got filled. So he went looking. The Wadi Moghra region in northern Egypt sits at the northeastern margin of the Qattara Depression, one of the lowest points in all of Africa. The same desert that saw the decisive battles of World War II. Scientists had known about this fossil site since 1899. For more than 100 years, they had been pulling monkey bones from it. 40 separate fossil localities, 50 kilometers of terrain, 27 different mammal species recorded. Not one ape. Salam organized systematic expeditions. 2023, 2024. Teams moving through harsh, unforgiving terrain, examining layers of rock that are 400 meters thick. 400 meters of compressed, layered time. They were looking for what everyone else said wasn't there. On one of those field days in 2024, a young researcher named Shourouk al-Ashkar was walking the ancient rock layers. She is a paleontologist at Mansoura University, trained specifically to recognize ape dental features in fossilized material, trained by Salam, part of the team that has been searching Wadi Moghra for years with a specific goal. She sees something in the sediment. She picks it up. She turns it over in her hands. She walks across the site to where Salam is crouching, examining another fragment, a piece he had set aside earlier because he wasn't sure what it was. She looks at him. She says 4 words. "Dr. Hesham, we found an ape." Salam looks at what she is holding, then looks at the fragment in his own hand. In that moment, standing in the Egyptian desert, under the same sun that baked the pharaohs, they realize they are each holding jaw fragments from 2 separate ancient apes. 2 individuals who lived 17 to 18 million years ago, individuals that had never been recorded anywhere in all of North Africa. 4 specimens total, an anterior mandible with 2 molar teeth, a second mandibular fragment from a different individual, incomplete, worn. To an untrained eye, these look like nothing remarkable, just rock. But Salam photographs everything immediately and sends the images to Dr. Eric Seifert at the University of Southern California, a paleontologist who has spent his entire career on primate evolution in this region of the world. Seifert's reaction is immediate. Something about this jaw is very different. The team goes to work. Meticulous analysis of every tooth surface, every bone angle, every measurement of the mandible. Then they feed it all into a computational analysis called Bayesian tip dating. Here's what that means in plain language. You take the DNA sequences of every living ape species on Earth today. You combine that genetic data with the physical measurements of every known fossil ape, living and extinct. You add the geological ages of each specimen, feed it all into the algorithm. The algorithm calculates the most statistically probable family tree, where each species sits, how they connect, and ultimately how they all connect back to you. The results come back. The team stops cold. This is a species brand new to science. They name it Masripithecus moghraensis. Masr from Misra, the Arabic word for Egypt. Pithecus from the Greek for ape. Moghraensis for Wadi Moghra, the valley where it was found. The Egyptian ape. Now here's what makes this fossil physically remarkable. The jaw is powerfully built, robust for its size. The canine and premolar teeth are exceptionally large compared to anything else from this time period. The molars have rounded, heavily textured chewing surfaces, almost wrinkled a pattern called crenulation, and the second and third molars are remarkably similar in size. This combination does not match anything else from 17 million years ago. Shourouk al-Ashkar described what these features mean. Masripithecus was built for versatility. When fruit was abundant, it ate fruit. When the seasonal climate dried out the forest, it could crack open nuts and process hard seeds, adapt to a changing environment. This was not an animal designed for one stable ecosystem. This was an animal built to survive change. Body weight, around 25 kilograms, larger than any monkey from the same era. The size alone tells you, this is not a monkey, this is definitively an ape. But here's what the Bayesian analysis showed that stopped everyone in their tracks. Masripithecus was not just an interesting side branch. It didn't just fill a gap in the fossil record. It sat as the closest known sister lineage to the ancestor of all living apes. Every single one. Gibbons, gorillas, orangutans, chimpanzees, and humans. Think about what that actually means. This creature found in Egyptian sand is sitting closer to the root of your family tree than anything previously discovered in North Africa. The species that may have launched the entire lineage that eventually became us was moving through a coastal Egyptian river delta 17 million years ago. The study was published the 26th of March, 2026, in the journal Science, arguably the most prestigious peer-reviewed scientific publication on the planet. First author, Shourouk al-Ashkar, the young Egyptian researcher who said 4 words in the desert and changed evolutionary science. But the fossil itself is only half the story. Stay with me here, because this is where it gets genuinely paradigm-shifting. When the team ran their statistical models to reconstruct where the common ancestor of all living apes most likely lived, the probability calculations didn't point south. They didn't point to the Rift Valley. They pointed north. Northern Afro-Arabia, the Eastern Mediterranean, the region stretching from modern Egypt, through Israel, Lebanon, Syria, into what is now Turkey. David Alba and his colleague, Julia Arias Martorell, at the University of Barcelona, wrote the companion perspective piece, published alongside the main paper, in the same issue of Science. They stated it plainly. These findings confirm that paleontologists might have been looking for crown hominoid ancestors in the wrong place. Not wrong in a minor footnote sense, in the fundamental sense. The origin point, the starting gun, the geographic center of where our entire ape family tree begins. And here's the precision that matters. This does not mean all of human evolution happened in Egypt. Evolution is not a single event with a single address. It's a process. A long, branching, interconnected web of populations moving and splitting and merging over millions of years. What Masripithecus suggests is that the critical transition, the one that gave rise to the lineage that became every living ape, may have happened far further north than anyone was looking. Salem described the fossil as a mosaic, something that looks like a bridge between older East African apes and later Eurasian apes. As if North Africa was absorbing evolutionary influences from both directions and then launching the lineage forward in an entirely new direction. As soon as the African tectonic plates finished their slow collision with Asia, as soon as a land bridge opened between Africa and Eurasia, apes began spreading north. The place they spread from, based on this analysis, right here, Egypt and its neighbors. The dawn of the apes. Not in the Rift Valley of Kenya, in the river delta of northern Egypt. Now, not everyone is ready to redraw the maps, and they shouldn't be. Sergio Almesia, a biological anthropologist at the Miquel Crucifont Catalan Institute of Paleontology in Spain, who was not involved in this study, told Live Science that while any new fossil ape is valuable, he finds the conclusion about Masripithecus being close to the universal ape ancestor a bit far-fetched. He wants more complete fossil evidence before ideas like this shift into mainstream consensus. That is a fair scientific position. Ellen Miller, a paleoanthropologist at Wake Forest University, also not involved, told National Geographic that a new find like this makes it tempting to draw arrows on maps. But she was careful. A discovery like this is always the beginning of the work, not the end. David Alba, at the University of Barcelona, who co-wrote the companion perspective piece, acknowledged that reconstructing reliable evolutionary relationships among Miocene apes has consistently proven difficult. Real uncertainties remain. Here's what we actually have. A single jawbone, no skull, no limb bones, no data on how this animal moved. We have teeth and a jaw. Dental anatomy really is one of the most informative parts of the skeleton for evolutionary history. Al-Ashkar made exactly that point. But a jaw is not the whole picture. This discovery has shifted the conversation. It has not ended it. The science is alive and arguing with itself. That is exactly how it should work. Here's the point that deserves more time than it gets. The fossil record, the document we use to reconstruct the entire story of life on this planet, is not a neutral record. It doesn't reflect nature evenly. It reflects where scientists chose to look. And for most of the 20th century, those choices were shaped by where funding flowed, where universities had established programs, where academic prestige was already built. East Africa had all three. It had the National Geographic grants, the Smithsonian expeditions, the Harvard researchers with the shovels. Once a scientific tradition forms in a place, once papers start citing each other, textbooks update, careers are built around the consensus, it takes enormous force to redirect it. North Africa spent most of the 20th century outside that loop. Political complications, limited infrastructure, scarce international funding. Researchers who might have been looking there like Salem's team at Mansoura University were doing so without the institutional resources of Oxford or Berkeley or the Smithsonian. Salem built his paleontology center from scratch. He trained students. One of them, Sana El-Sayed, became the first woman from the Middle East to lead author an internationally published vertebrate paleontology paper. Another Shoruk al-Ashkar just changed evolutionary science by saying 4 words in a desert. James Rossi, a paleontologist at Stony Brook University, was blunt after this discovery. He said Masripithecus shows what happens when you go looking for fossils outside East Africa, and that our view of ape evolution in Afro-Arabia still has his exact words, huge blind spots. Huge blind spots. We found one jawbone from one valley in one country. The Moghra Formation at Wadi Moghra is 400 meters thick. Scientists have been working only the uppermost exposed layers for a century. Morocco has similar geological formations from this period. Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, the entire northern coastline of Africa, mostly unexplored for apes. How many more are out there? An Egyptian team, at an Egyptian university, in Egyptian sand, published in Science. That fact sits alongside the discovery itself, and both say something important about what we know and about how we came to know it. What else might be buried in the regions we decided weren't worth looking? What other origin stories are waiting under sand we haven't properly searched? Now, about those baboons. Let's close the loop I opened at the beginning. Ancient Egypt built a civilization unlike anything the world had seen, but buried inside that civilization, across 3,000 years of recorded history, was a fixation that no other civilization on Earth shared. A deep, sustained reverence for primates. The god Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, knowledge, and eternal judgment, was depicted as a Hamadryas baboon, seated in solemn authority. Millions of ibis were mummified in his honor at Saqqara. Thousands upon thousands of baboons were wrapped in linen and consecrated to this god, entombed alongside pharaohs. A statue inscribed with King Narmer's name, the first pharaoh, dates to 3100 BCE. At Hermopolis, the city sacred to Thoth, 35-ton quartzite statues of seated baboons were erected by Amenhotep III in the 14th century BCE. These were not wild animals living in Egypt. They were imported at considerable cost from the Horn of Africa. Their dangerous canine teeth were removed for safety. They were kept in temple sanctuaries, revered in life, honored in death. People who live alongside baboons today across sub-Saharan Africa don't revere them. They consider them pests, crop raiders, nuisances. In the cultural traditions of sub-Saharan Africa, baboons barely appear. Only in Egypt were they gods. So here is the question I want to leave you sitting with. A land whose desert sand holds the bones of the closest known ancestor to all living apes is also the only ancient civilization on Earth that looked at a primate and said, "This creature belongs with wisdom, with knowledge, with the divine." Was that symbolic coincidence? Or did ancient Egyptians have some intuition, some deep cultural memory encoded across generations, that these creatures were part of their story in a way no other civilization grasped? Science will not make that connection directly, but you can ask it, and it doesn't have a clean answer. So, where does this leave us? Does this discovery prove that modern apes, and by extension modern humans, originated in Egypt? No. Single discoveries don't work that way. Science doesn't hand you a proof. It hands you an accumulation of evidence, a slowly refining picture. But this jawbone has shifted that picture, meaningfully, irreversibly, in a direction no one expected. And if the first link in the human chain wasn't where we thought it was, if the family album's first photograph was sitting in the wrong drawer the whole time, then we have to ask ourselves something honest. What else about our own origin story have we simply accepted because that's where we looked first? The history of humanity is still being written. 17 million years ago, northern Egypt, a coastal river delta that no longer exists. A creature moving through the undergrowth, fruit in the trees above it, water channels all around it. A world that vanished and left almost nothing behind. Almost nothing. It left a jaw, in the sand, waiting. And it turns out someone just had to be willing to look. That is the story of Masripithecus moghraensis, the Egyptian ape, published the 26th of March, 2026, in the journal Science. Lead author, Shoruk al-Ashkar, Mansoura University Vertebrate Paleontology Center, Egypt. Senior author, Hesham Salam. Co-author, Eric Seifert, University of Southern California. The research team is continuing its work in the region, and they believe many more fossils are waiting. My question for you, one answer. Drop it below. Do you think this changes where science looks next? Or is East Africa still the answer? Tell me why. I read every single one. If this video cracked open a question you didn't have before, that's exactly what this channel is for. Hit like, subscribe. Because we live in the space between what science has confirmed and what it's still figuring out. See you in the next one.